Good morning, everybody who is tuning in, and thank you so much for joining us today's Tuesday morning. I would like to just give an overview. My name is Katie West. I'm the Director of Strategic Initiatives at the Housing Network of Rhode Island. The Housing Network is a nonprofit organization. We have 19 members who are affordable housing developers, community developers, who own and operate over 7,500 rental and homeownership units for low and moderate income families across Rhode Island. We are also the backbone organization for Homes RI, which is a coalition of more than 80 organizations across different sectors who support the goal of increasing the supply of affordable housing. And we're so pleased to be hosting this roundtable this morning with our federal delegation, who is doing a lot of work. Thank you all for being here. I want to just welcome Senator Jack Reed, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, Congressman Seth Magaziner, and Congressman Gabe Amo. We appreciate your time today and your commitment to the issue of housing affordability, and maintaining supports for low and moderate income families and for the state and the people of Rhode Island. I'm also going to welcome our panelists who are joining us as experts this morning. You'll hear from them as practitioners in the field. Joining us, we have Lisa Guillette, who's the Executive Director of Foster Forward, who will be moderating the discussion. Rhonda Mitchell, who's Executive Director of the Newport Housing Authority. Colin Penney, Executive Director of South County Habitat for Humanity. Peter Chapman, President and CEO of One Neighborhood Builders based in Providence, and Sucely Murillo, who is a tenant advocate and a member of National Low-Income Housing Coalition's Collective, which is a cohort of advocates doing national and state level advocacy. We have about 120 people on the webinar. So again, welcome and thank you to all of you who are joining in. I see we have some board members on the call from the Housing Network. Thank you for joining us. The Secretary of Housing in Rhode Island, Deborah Goddard, staff from the Office of the Speakers, who has, of course, championed housing as an issue here in the state of Rhode Island. Representative June Speakman, I see, I'm scanning the list, and I believe we will have some other state legislators tuning in as well. So again, thank you to everybody who is on the call, our congressional delegation again, and our panelists. The Q&A should be enabled, so you should be able to ask questions in the chat. However, just please know that we are going to have very limited time, and so we will mostly be using that feature to catalog questions for future reference. We anticipate a lot of the questions that folks have will be asked in this webinar in some way, shape, or form. And I am now going to turn it over to Lisa to open up the question, to open up the official roundtable.
Good morning. Welcome to the members. Let's dive right in. With cuts to HUD, Medicaid, and other critical social programs, low and moderate income residents in Rhode Island face increasing uncertainty in accessing stable housing, health care, and essential services. Given these threats, could each of you speak briefly to ways you are working to protect our federal safety net and how Rhode Island's communities proactively respond to these policy changes? And we'll start with Senator Reed.
Well, thank you very much, Lisa. Also, let me commend you for being selected Women of the Year by USA Today. That's quite an honor. Congratulations to all the panelists and to all of our colleagues here. We're facing an administration that is bound and determined to undercut housing policy in the United States significantly. So we've got our work cut out for us. In fact, just last week, the continuing resolution they passed cut Section 8 voucher funding, which will lead to 32,000 fewer housing vouchers across the country. And they are not pro-housing in the sense of any other administration I've seen. The next battle we have is really going to be critical too, because it's the reconciliation package. They would like $4.6 trillion tax cut over several years. To pay for that, there's only a couple of places to go. One is Medicaid and the other is SNAP. But those impacts will further complicate the cost. And then the tariff programs that the president is introducing, it's been estimated that housing will go up $9,000 because of the tariffs on Canadian lumber. So we're, to your point, trying to do what we can do to stop this. First, oppose the president's budget provisions, fight very, very hard against this reconciliation package. We're going to need some Republican support. We're seeing a few breakthroughs. I had a amendment on the CR, which would prevent cuts to Medicaid and Medicare, and we got 2 Republicans to join us, and actually we need 4 to be effective. So we're halfway there, I hope. And then last week, Mike Rounds and I wrote a letter to the HUD to oppose its plan to eliminate state field offices. So the key is we have to get our Republicans to be just as sensitive to these issues as we are.
Thank you. Other members would like to respond?
Well,
Senator Whitehouse.
first of all, thank you. I'd suggest a couple of things. One is there's a nasty scoundrel named Russell Vogt who is running the Office of Management and Budget. So he's a very powerful inside player in the Trump administration. And he came in having said that in a speech, in a public speech, that it was one of his goals to inflict so much trauma, that was his word, trauma, on people in public service that they don't want to come into work anymore. And I think, you know, your employees, like a lot of others, are feeling that trauma. So recommendation 1 is to go out of your way to be as high touch and engaged with your teams as possible. And, you know, one of the things about being stressed is it helps when you're around people who you know care in the same way that you do. So I think, you know, as good as you are already at that, everybody upping their game to look out for each other, I think is really important. The second is to coordinate as well as you can with colleague agencies in red states, more exactly in states that have a Republican senator, which includes Maine, which includes Pennsylvania, which includes Florida for 2 and Ohio. So, you know, not only talk to the housing agencies in those states, but people you feel you've got a particularly close connection with. I'm even telling people, you know, go through your contacts and send an email saying, call your senator, call whatever Republican senator it is, call them and express your concern. Because when the first blast of the muskrat misbehavior happened, the phones blew up in the Senate, and that actually made a big difference to some of our Republican colleagues. It really spooked them. They were getting up to 1,600 calls a minute, and the Senate phone system had to be rebooted to deal with it. So hearing from people really does matter, particularly if they're home state constituents. The third thing is that the Trump administration is doing what I call fog bank theory. When they have a court order saying that certain funds should be unfrozen, they don't unfreeze them. But they don't particularly care to say a hard no that would create a legal event that would allow somebody to be identified and held in contempt. So they go back into the fog bank and they don't answer your calls. They don't answer your emails. They answer only with sort of vague I don't know what's going on, or they say, oh, it looks really good, just hang in there. Or in some cases, I've actually had them say, yep, those funds are cleared, it's good to go. And across that whole spectrum of fog, the funds don't actually come. So helping us understand where you are still getting funds frozen is really important. Then we can go to that point and press for a hard answer. And then that might release the funds because, as much as they don't want to release the funds, they really don't want to be caught as the person in violation of a court order. So help us put spotlights into the fog bank. Jack mentioned reconciliation. That's going to be a big deal for all of us. Reconciliation has 2 phases, and they're going through the first phase right now. Gabe and I sit on our respective budget committees, so we've had to witness this stuff. The first phase is to take all the different authorizing committees and give them the authority to raise X much money or cut X much money out of their budgets. It doesn't touch programs specifically, but for instance, with Medicaid, when they're saying they're going to cut $850 billion out of the account, that they have to be coming after Medicaid because that's the biggest thing in the account. It's the only way you could get anywhere near that much money. So it's a deduction. Not like a tax deduction, like a Sherlock Holmes deduction that you can figure out what they're up to. So the next stage is going to be tougher because they actually have to write the laws. They actually have to put in the effective language that specifically cuts Medicaid, for instance, that specifically cuts HUD funds, for instance. And that gives us a whole second opportunity to really drill in hard against that specific language. Now, the good thing about reconciliation is that over on Gabe's side of the house, they got it through the budget committee, but they still have to get through the floor. And it's not going to be as easy as the continuing resolution was. And so it only takes, 3 on your side, Gabe? 4 on your side, 4 on our side. To make something go away from reconciliation. Now, those people might not want to put their hands up and say publicly that, but they want to go to their leadership and quietly say, this has, I got people in my district who really need this housing project, I've got, like, the guy who's my best donor is a big developer for Section 8, and I can't, they just talk quietly back to those people and stuff begins to fall back out of reconciliation. So, again, when you're talking to people or urging people to be in touch with states with Republican senators, don't forget the developer community around these housing projects, because many of them are private sector folks, and those private sector folks also have a voice and might be a voice to whom the MAGA Republican types will be more sympathetic than a housing agency. So that's my array of advice. Thank you for all your support. And again, the business of trauma was a deliberate thing by these bastards, and you're feeling it too. So to the extent that we can provide support, we love you, we thank you, we think you're terrific.
Thank you. We're going to move us along because I know that Rhonda has a specific question for Representative Amo. So Rhonda, do you want to take it away?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Again, I'm Rhonda Mitchell. I'm the Executive Director of the Newport Housing Authority, and I'm the co-vice president of the Public Housing Association of Rhode Island. And collectively, our public housing authorities serve here in Rhode Island nearly 20,000 Rhode Island households through our public housing program, our Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher program, and some home ownership programs. In the voucher program alone, our agencies are contributing more than $100 million annually to the Rhode Island economy through housing assistance payments to landlords. In addition, some of our agencies are developers, and we're preserving and producing affordable homes as part of the 14,000 Rhode Island homes that are assisted through the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program. Yet, despite the nearly 35,000 households being served by these rental assistance programs, Nearly 50% of Rhode Island renters are housing cost burdened, paying more than 30% of their income for rent, according to our 2024 Housing Works Rhode Island fact book. So in Newport alone, we have 15,000 applicants on our waiting list for housing assistance. And while we have the highest amount of affordable housing in the state, with only about 50 apartments or subsidies that turn over in any given year, the wait for housing assistance could truly be a century or more. This housing crisis is denying Rhode Islanders the opportunity to live in a home that they can afford. So we have to not only protect, but we have to expand these critical housing programs so that we can address the alarming rise in housing insecurity faced not only by Rhode Islanders, but by so many in our nation. So with that, I'd like to begin with you, Congressman Amo. Given the challenging political climate and the persistent threats to federal funding, how can we ensure the long-term stability of critical programs like housing choice vouchers, public housing operating and capital funds? And two, what strategies can we pursue to protect public housing and to expand affordable housing in general in the face of these budget cuts that we're facing?
Well, first off, thank you for the question, Rhonda. It was good to see you last week in the office with a great array of leaders in the housing space in Rhode Island. And, look, I think both Senators Reid and Whitehouse set the context, and I know Congressman Magazine has been working on these issues for a while. The challenge here, the context that we're operating in is if you look at Project 2025 and you look at their plans, there's a deliberate section of that that I was reviewing last night in preparation for this that is about the elimination of any housing first strategies, right? So there's a philosophical, a partisan political opposition to housing as part of the solutions to make both our people and our communities whole. So your question addresses the political headwinds, but I want to address that on the front end. Like those are intense. Those are fierce, compounded by the Musk Trump urge to shrink arbitrarily government functions. We are playing on a landscape where there is really an intense opposition to any positive movement. And we see that in the CR. Senator Reid outlined it. You see that in Rhode Island with 37,000 people, I think you used 35, I've seen both numbers, between 35 and 37,000 people are on some form of housing assistance. They would be at risk because we have not funded vouchers to the level that are necessary. If you level fund when everybody has done and seen and experienced the increases in their rent, in that context, that is just going to be difficult for everybody. So that's what we're dealing with. Now, I'm not hopeless here because I think on this point, we have to wage this intense fight on reconciliation because I tell everybody we've got to take the things that are coming right in front of us and focus, and we know that spills over into all of the impacts of these programs. People will just have a tougher time when you cut food assistance, when you cut Medicaid. There will be a rougher go for everybody, and so we have to stay focused there. But at the same time, as the impacts of these programs start and the cuts to these programs start to get experience, we see wholesale planning to terminate people who work at HUD in regional offices and in the national office. They all had this reduction in force plan that they've all submitted last week to their agencies. So we got to play defense for the federal employees, the public servants, the career professionals who have helped and have been hand in glove with you all to make sure that people have the housing options despite the challenges and the long waiting list. And then at the same time, I think there is some proactive work that we can plant the seeds for. For example, I'm a co-sponsor of a bill that establishes a council on an interagency council on affordable housing and preservation. And the idea here is, how can we put folks, practitioners around the table to address some of the crises, but also deal with some of those capital challenges that we see so many face because of our lack of investment, our disinvestment. And now, look, that's not something that's going to come through in this Congress. I'm pretty practical about that, but I do know that on the legislative side, you have to start to plant seeds to get that work done. And hopefully, when the political winds change, we have an opportunity to move more aggressively. And so as we also look at what we can leverage to modernize public housing. Again, this is a refrain that I hear, certainly in our meeting last week and across the state. We have had tools traditionally like CDBG, like the Home Investments Partnership program, those traditional grants, and we may need to be more creative if those programs survive to get the funding from there. And so I would lean on this community, our delegation, to help get you through those applications so that we can maximize the funding that's coming. But again, we are operating in this context of arbitrary austerity, and so it is unclear when we will turn those levers, but the public pressure that Senator Whitehouse outlined, our ability to build coalition and allyship with your partners in the red states so that we can connect, certainly Seth and I with our colleagues in the House and Jack and Sheldon with theirs in the Senate, so that those stories of impact are reflected. That will be part of how we deal with both the political and the practical of the situation we're in. I'm sorry if that was long, but
No, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. Would anyone else like to weigh in or add anything to this?
Yeah, well, I'll just say, first of all, thank you again for your incredible work and for pulling together over, I think, 150, as I see it, leaders here in the housing space. So you will find no congressional delegation in the country that cares more, I think, about housing than the four people who you have on this call. Jack and Sheldon have been leaders in this area for a long time. Gabe has made it a priority. I'm a former board member of both Rhode Island Housing and Crossroads, so I've been working on housing issues for over a decade. And it's not an exaggeration to say that we are in a state of crisis right now. And I won't repeat too much of what's already been said, but I think about this, I distill it very simply. We've got two challenges ahead of us. One is this reconciliation bill that my colleagues have talked about. We don't know exactly what the details of that bill are, but we know that when it drops, it's going to contain deep cuts to housing. And they have given the Financial Services Committee a target of $1 billion cut that will almost certainly include cuts to HUD. They've given the Agriculture Committee I think a $300 billion target that will very likely include cuts to things like the 502 direct loan program, which helps people in rural areas access home ownership. So that's challenge number one. And challenge number two, as has been said, is that even without passing any bills, Elon Musk and his army of inexperienced interns are just going around and shutting off funding and trying to shut down entire agencies illegally and lawlessly. So again, without being too repetitive, there's a strategy for each of these things. When it comes to Elon Musk and his interns illegally shutting off funding, the most important thing, as Sheldon said, for anyone to do is if you see that your funding has been cut off or that you don't have access to the portals, is to call us right away so that we can advocate for you. And that advocacy can look like a lot of different things depending on the situation. The advocacy could look like public noise, where we will get on our soapboxes and yell and scream and make a lot of noise until hopefully there's a change. Or it could be working quietly to try to find Republicans that we work with who also care about these issues and also have impacted constituents to try to do some private outreach to the White House. There's no one-size-fits-all approach. It depends situation by situation, but the most important thing is reach out to us so that we can work with you on a plan for how to get the funding restored. At the same time, there's an outside legal strategy happening in a lot of these areas as well that has largely been working. Over 100 lawsuits have been filed against the illegal abuses of power by the administration. Everything from firing federal workers without cause, trying to shut down agencies like USAID, giving these unvetted Elon Musk lackeys access to private data. And, you know, when you file 100 lawsuits, you're not going to win 100% of the time, but we've been winning more often than not so far. But the short version is, if you're having issues with funding, call our offices, let us know, we'll work with you. When it comes to this funding bill, this reconciliation bill, just as Jack and Sheldon and Gabe said, we only need to flip 4 Republicans out of 220 in the House on any one issue. And so over the next 2 months, we are just going to torture them. We're going to torture them on a person-to-person basis when we're in Washington and say you cannot pay for tax cuts for billionaires by throwing people off their health insurance or out of their homes or taking food away from hungry kids. And then there's also a robust outside strategy as well to torture these Republican members in their districts. You've seen it. I mean, they're all canceling their town halls because they're too afraid to face their constituents who are up in arms. And once the specific bill is released with all of these cuts laid out, then that heat that they're feeling from their constituents is going to multiply by 10. And so that is the situation. We're not going to win 100% of the time, but we are going to fight for every inch to protect all of these programs. 502, Section 8, low-income housing tax credit, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it only works if we work closely together. So at the risk of being repetitive, you know, that's the way I distill it. And having strong communication is what makes it all work.
Thank you, Congressman, and thank you, Rhonda. We have so much to continue to dive into. I'm going to turn it over to Colin Penney from South County Habitat for Humanity for our next question.
Good morning, and thank you all for joining us. Again, I'm Colin Penney. I'm the Executive Director of South County Habitat for Humanity. We create affordable home ownership opportunities in Washington County. Most recently, we just completed a 7-house development in Hopkinton. All those homes were net zero. So not only were these homes affordable from the mortgage standpoint, but our homeowners will have little to no utility payments, just creating even more opportunities for wealth building and for sustainability. In addition, we're on the final phase of permitting a 22-house subdivision in Westerly. One of the greatest tools that habitats across the country in our rural communities have is the USDA 502 loan. Out of the past 18 houses we've sold, I believe 15 were sold through USDA 502. It's an amazing tool, and a lot of the buyers would not have been able to qualify if they weren't going through the USDA 502 program that we work with. We've talked a little bit about it already, but to Representative Magaziner, there are a few programs that are specifically for home ownership, particularly a USDA 502 and SHOP. As you mentioned, there's a lot of strain on these programs and have been for a very long time. I know the 502 is highly overprescribed every year. And if with the possible funding cuts, it would be decimating to the home ownership industry. You had mentioned a few possible strategies to restoring this funding, or we'd love to see these increased. But what can you do as our elected officials, and what can we do on the ground to highlight what important programs they are for us?
Yeah, so I've already talked about what we're doing, and as have Jack and Sheldon and Gabe, but to kind of reemphasize what you can do in addition to communicating with us, tell stories. I mean, in as public a way as you can. One thing that we have seen is that the administration is still susceptible to public pressure, at least to an extent. And you see that when they'll roll out things and they'll walk them back, right? You know, the first day that Elon Musk took over the government, they shut down everything. You know, they were shutting down the Medicaid portal. They were shutting down, I mean, all kinds of stuff. There was a huge public uproar, and then they backed off. You know, on tariffs, they keep going back and forth and, you know, moving forward, then taking a step back, then moving forward again, because they're nervous about public opinion. And so I think telling stories, and I think in particular, you know, the habitat story in Washington County and other initiatives that take advantage of 502 loans are great because they serve primarily rural areas. So like those are great stories to tell. We all have to be content creators. Go online, tell your story, promote your work, get your national associations to do the same. And, you know, we are past the point where, you know, a press release and a story on the nightly news is the way to reach people. It's much more online now. And so I'd say continue to share these stories about your successes, about the importance of your work, because the narratives are really important. But again, when it comes to the 502 loans in particular, we know that the Republican budget requires at least $230 billion of cuts under the Agriculture Committee's jurisdiction. A lot of that's going to come out of SNAP and food assistance, which is going to be terrible, but they very well could take some out of this program as well, which would also be devastating. So we just have to fight back as hard as we can and tell our stories. And I'll yield to my other colleagues.
Thank you.
Well, let me just make some quick points. First of all, when we get into reconciliation, it's a zero-sum game. If we get money for the 502 program, it has to come from someplace else, and that's typically another key program. They're going to take care of the big farmers and subsidies and all those things. Second, we're in the midst of a real constitutional crisis here. Trump has complete contempt of the Constitution, the law. He doesn't follow the law. And there's two things we have to do. One, Congress has to step up and reclaim its constitutional obligation to be the place where the power of the purse is executed. And that means Republicans coming across and helping us. So push those Republicans through your friends across the country. Second is the courts. It's going to take a while, but eventually we'll get to a Supreme Court case. And I hope the court stands up, the Supreme Court, and says the president has to follow the law. That's a very simple concept, but they have to say it. And then the president has to follow it. So in the meantime, we're fighting as hard as we can to push back on certain programs. But as I said initially, it's a choice between SNAP or rural housing. Not a good choice at all, but that's what we're facing.
Thank you. We're going to pivot to rental housing and welcome Peter Chapman from One Neighborhood Builders.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. Good morning to everyone. I'm excited to be part of this conversation. Again, I'm Peter Chapman, and I'm president and CEO of One Neighborhood Builders. We are a Providence-based nonprofit development corporation that focuses on increasing the stock of affordable housing and revitalizing communities across the state of Rhode Island. We've developed in our 30-plus year history approximately 600 rental and for sale units, and we have another 400 units either under construction or in the pipeline. So when we're done with that pipeline, we will officially become one of the largest nonprofit producers of affordable housing in Southern New England. I should point out that most of our portfolio has been developed with equity generated from the sale of federal low-income housing tax credits, which has financed literally over 90% of affordable housing across the country. I joined One Neighborhood Builders just last month after spending over 25 years leading several different public and private institutions that specialize in financing and developing affordable housing and also facilitating regional economic development. And this work spans a broad geography that includes a number of markets, including Massachusetts. I should point out that I've also been an advisor to HUD and other institutional investors in affordable housing and urban revitalization, including several philanthropies and CDFIs, which are very critical institutions in supporting affordable housing development across the country. My question is for Senator Whitehouse. Coming back to the low-income housing tax credit, which is a principal source of financing affordable rental construction and has been a vital tool in addressing the housing crisis. You introduced the Affordable Housing Construction Act, which would significantly increase LIHTC. Can you speak a little bit to this legislation? Do you see any opportunities on the horizon for perhaps a bipartisan bill that would be aimed at long-term solutions to increase affordable housing inventory?
Thanks, Peter. In the short run, I would have to be candid with you and say no. I think that sorting out the continuing resolution and seeing where that lands is going to be the kind of immediate business of everybody on this issue. And then trying to see what the continuing resolution works out to in terms of where cuts are and where extensions are is the second one. And once we know where we are from those two things, I think the chance to try to improve some of these programs then kicks in. So I think it's going to take a while. I haven't even filed yet my low-income home buyers tax credit, although I am going to pursue that for this reason. It just, we're so caught up now in fighting through the CR, fighting through its application, fighting through the reconciliation measure, that only the most obvious bipartisan stuff is being able to, I think, be pulled together at this point. If I could add one slightly political point, Jack and I have a lot of colleagues who voted for the continuing resolution, 10 of them, including the leader. None of us did in this delegation. And what's become of that is there's an enormous intra-family quarrel happening about who was right and who was wrong, with most progressives piling on our 10 colleagues who I like and respect, and who had a very good case to make. This was not an easy call for any of us. And I think the sooner we can stop quarreling with each other about who should have voted how on something that's in the past, the quicker we can get back to focusing on the evils that are coming at us in the reconciliation, the evils of how the continuing resolution is implemented, and so forth. And one example is that the continuing resolution actually did, it was like having a regular bad year in housing. It would have been really tough if we'd gone into a shutdown for housing. The doggy crowd, they say Doge, I say doggy, wants to cut 50% from HUD. They want to shut down the Providence office. In a shutdown, they can do all that stuff. They just change their contingency plan to do it. And they have these enormous powers to declare things non-essential, which are very hard to challenge in court. And once you declare either a program or people non-essential, you can do wholesale firings called reductions in force. So housing is an example of one of the reasons I think that so many of our colleagues hung in there in the Senate, where we really had a does it happen or doesn't it happen equation. The House did a beautiful job. They had to stick together in order to force the Republicans to get their squabbling caucus unified. And when they did that, they put together a protest vote, but nothing was ever going to change the outcome. The Senate could change the outcome, and the outcomes, at least in this one area of going with the CR, actually are better than what would have happened under shutdown. So again, I'm not trying to pick sides. I voted the other way from those 10 people, and I could articulate my reasons. My point here is the sooner we stop our internecine feuding about this, And the sooner we get back to work on the real danger, which is the looming 50% cut they want, the looming shutdown of the Providence office that they want, the more effective that we will be. So I'm sorry to editorialize on that subject, but this business of carling in our own dugout while the other team's on the field is causing us to lose a lot of runs.
Right. Thank you, Senator.
Do we have any other members that want to respond to that or?
Well, no, I would add just quickly, one to the senator's previous point. You know, we've got some dastardly things on the horizon, and so our focus has got to, you know, I think we have the family conversations, but we have this really big nasty thing coming in front of us in the form of reconciliation. That's why you hear us beat the drum. You know, nearly every day that, you know, I've been in the district doing something to call attention to that and working as hard to make sure that, to Seth's point, that we are amplifying the harms that are on the horizon. That is just so critically important. And to the topic of LIHTC, you know, I think it's an important thing to raise up the fact that in the House last year we had bipartisan support, right? We had the Senate, where if there wasn't a presidential election on the horizon, there could have been a prospect of action there. I certainly would defer to the senators on that. But the folks who are now in charge of the White House, you know, and the sort of the dark forces got greedy. They said this was more important to focus on the billionaires. Right. And I do want to assert that the possibility of bipartisanship is not dead, but that greed has consumed what has been a program that has secured bipartisan support in the past. And so, you know, I can't really speak to its future, but I would contextualize why this is not a normal moment that we're existing in. And, you know, we have to fight for the future of the low-income housing tax credit, and you know, this group certainly will. But you know, that is how stark this movement, this activity from Trump, Musk, and all of their affiliates, that's how stark it's been.
Yeah.
Thank you, Congressman.
I thank you guys. I think so. I think the question was originally about rental assistance and also just sort of generally what a proactive agenda could look like. And I'll just say we've all been talking a lot about how we meet this existential crisis of Elon Musk's government takeover and the upcoming reconciliation bill. And I think we all have voiced that those are our immediate priorities. But I also think it is true that we need to put out a proactive agenda on housing that can offer a counterpoint to what the Republicans are offering. And there's a real opportunity for us there politically as well, because I don't think either party on the national level has really presented housing as a front burner issue, even though, you know, there's a poll out that I saw in Roadmap this morning that it's now the #1 issue for Rhode Islanders by far. I think our state leaders over the last few years have done a great job making housing a front burner issue again in the State House, and we have a real opportunity at the national level. So again, Senator Reid on the Banking Committee has been a leader on this for a long time, but certainly putting forward a proactive vision that includes expanding the low-income housing tax credit, expanding rental assistance in Section 8 is helpful. I think that one thing that I'm looking at on the Natural Resources Committee, where we have jurisdiction over the historic preservation tax credit, is how we can expand and improve that tax credit to make it even more effective in creating housing and converting old commercial property into residential. I think emphasizing that we know in Rhode Island from our own experience that a housing first model works and that should be a national policy. If you get people housed, then everything else becomes easier to solve. And I think a lot of important work has to happen at the state level. And again, I give our state leaders a lot of credit working with all of you on this and really thinking through how do we make it easier to build again, because I can tell you, having been on the Rhode Island Housing Board for 8 years and the Crossroads Board for a decade, we don't make it easy to build in a lot of places, particularly in some of the blue states. And there are ways that we should look at to streamline the process while still allowing for community input and stakeholder feedback whenever there's a new development, but do it in a way that's streamlined so that it doesn't take years and years and millions of dollars going to lawyers before you can put a shovel in the ground. And so I do think that we have an opportunity as a party and as a coalition to advance a positive policy agenda at the federal level, just like we have at the local level, that will win the hearts and minds of voters and present a counterpoint to what's happening with the the terrible actions of the Trump administration and congressional Republicans.
Thank you for lifting up those bright spots. Another bright spot on this call is Sucely Murillo. She's a tenant advocate and NLIHC collective member, and I'd like to invite her to speak and pose a question now.
Good morning, everybody. I appreciate you joining us today, and I appreciate giving me a voice as a tenant. As you all know, housing crisis is really going on. There is much that we will wish to do, but there is laws and legislations that are preventing us from. As I experience having housing instability, it's one battle. I find myself, honestly, I think it's much part because we have a landlord-tenant handbook, and sometimes exercising our rights gets taken off a fight. Honestly, asking for a safe and healthy home is a human right to myself. The more I learn about the laws and legislations putting out there, the more I get myself an understanding and involved on how to be a voice, how to speak, and what to do, taking different actions, being present. I have a question for Senator Jack Reed. Following what I just mentioned, fair housing protections are essential to ensuring that all residents have equal access to safe and stable housing. Yet, discrimination in rental housing still persists, and the current executive administration is weakening various civil protections, including for race and gender, that apply to housing and temporary shelter. My question following these comments will be, what enforcement mechanisms can be strengthened by the Congress to prevent housing discrimination, and what can state and local governments do to further fair housing, especially for low-income rent tenants?
Seth, you're muted.
This question was for Senator Jack Reed.
Thank you. Technology is a baffling phenomenon. The Fair Housing Act of 1968 is still the law, which prevents discrimination, the sale, rental of housing. I don't think it's going to be enforced vigorously at all. As Sheldon indicated, they're looking to close down our HUD office here in Rhode Island, which means we have fewer people available to insist upon compliance with the law. The other thing I should point out is Donald Trump has a long history of trying to avoid. He and his family were sued for many years because they very consciously excluded Blacks from any type of access to their rental properties in New York City. And finally, the case resolved, but his enthusiasm for fair housing is not particularly robust. And I think that's going to translate into the federal effort, unfortunately. Still, what we've tried to do in the appropriations process, this year's bill in the Senate, Senator Collins and I helped provide $86 million for enforcement efforts. Now, that did not become law because the CR, the continuing resolution, displaced our appropriations bill. But we have folks on both sides that understand that this access to housing cannot be denied people because of race or any other qualification. The other factor too is that there are state laws in place, and I would urge you to really get engaged with the state and try to get those state laws enforced, because I think the appetite of the state is much more significant. The other factor that you should be aware of is that many fair housing groups across the country have sued the Trump administration already for trying to take back funding for enforcement of fair housing. And again, all of these cases are heading up to the Supreme Court. It won't be tomorrow, but I hope within a reasonable period of time, the court is able to take critical cases and make it clear that the president must follow the law. We're going to keep pushing along. And again, I think this is one of those issues where there is a bipartisan sense of fellowship, that there is an understanding that housing should not be denied people because of their race or their gender or anything else. So we're going to keep pushing it. But again, we're fighting an administration and fighting a president, basically, who has been throughout his entire life ignoring and violating these fair housing laws.
Thank you, Senator. You mentioned state action, and we had a question in the chat from Rhode Island State Senator Basilian. What areas do you think state policymakers should focus on at the State House to mitigate the impact of potential cuts and policy changes at HUD?
Well, quickly, I think they should follow up with Speaker Sakatchi's issues, which are ensuring that every community has its fair share of affordable housing. It can be done, I think, without disrupting the culture and the community aspects of a neighborhood. It should be done that way. We have to look for money, basically, and that's where the hard part comes in. I have legislation that would provide $50 billion over 10 years through the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. But the likelihood of passing that is very low because, again, their priority is tax cuts, not investing in affordable housing. One other point I'll make, just a quick point, is yesterday they announced that they're going to look at opening federal land to affordable housing. Which is mostly the Department of Interior, and we don't have a lot of Department of Interior lands in the state of Rhode Island. So that, I think, if it has any effect, will be in the West and the South and areas like that. But the real point here is money, and they will I think, be supportive of the resources necessary to help.
Yeah, I agree with everything Jack said, and Senator Basilian, thank you for joining and thank you for your great leadership. I mean, I think our state leaders deserve a lot of credit for making housing a top tier issue in the State House over the last few years, and so I'd say continue hammering away at it. As a former state treasurer, I really feel for you guys right now because the timing here is terrible. You know, the Republican budget plan and its potential big cuts to state funding for Medicaid and other services is going to drop right around the time that you all are writing the state budget. And so you're not going to have a lot of time to plan and adapt. So I think the position of the Speaker and the Senate President to be cautious in not making too many new commitments before we know what the federal picture looks like is a smart, prudent thing to do. And then more broadly, I agree. I mean, funding is always helpful, but I think also continuing to do what the Speaker and Senate President have been doing and look at what are the possible ways to streamline zoning and permitting while still making sure that you have robust opportunity for community input, environmental protection, et cetera, but perhaps in a way where the process can move along faster and doesn't get as bogged down in legal fees and all the rest, I think is something that the state has been moving in a positive direction on in the last couple of years. I would love to see that continue. I was just looking at the statistics from the housing department the other day, and the state's been making some good progress in building new units in the last couple of years, but the price per unit, frankly, is still high. And I think that continuing to find ways to streamline the process will help with that.
Great. You've given us so many incredible takeaways today. We're so grateful for your time, and just want to invite the members to lead us in some closing remarks. Any last thoughts that you'd like to lift up for us?
Last thoughts are that I haven't had a chance yet to remind everybody how very important our senior Senator Jack Reed has been over many, many, many years in this area. He's the top Democrat on the banking committee in seniority, although armed services as a chair means he's not chair of banking, but he still has a lot of clout there. And I think he has won every national housing award there is. I think he's won most of them twice. So, we're all very committed to this. We very much appreciate the leadership of Joe Shikarchi and the state officials here, but we also have a pretty cool champion in our midst in this delegation. Take that, Jack.
Well, I'll accept it gratefully, and you're very kind indeed. I've been doing this for a while, but we're in the most difficult situation we have been in my entire career, in not just the dimension of housing, but in every dimension. The president is dedicated to chaos, to confusion, to disruption, and it's all, I think, ultimately designed to enhance his personal power. This is a period of time in which we're going to have to do our best to sort of hold the line, defend, prevent the worst things from happening. And then we hope with either the conversion of our Republican colleagues or success in the 2026 election, we'll be able to change the political dynamic in Washington. Once again, begin investing in America. And again, this would be much more difficult without my very talented colleagues, Sheldon and Seth and Gabe, and much, much, much more difficult without you, without the people on the ground every day doing the hard things, reminding us what we can do and helping us get those things done. So to Lisa and Sucely and Colin and everybody else, bravo. Thank you.
Well, yeah, I would say briefly in closing, one, I'm so grateful to work in this great delegation, but even more importantly, to work alongside so many people here on this call who are in the trenches every single day. And I know that this is often, and at least in recent weeks, I've felt like all of my conversations have been, a little more somber than usual. But I do truly believe that we should remain hopeful. Not hopeful because of a political moment, but because of the efforts that you all are leading, and we have to hang tough, hang tighter together, over communicate like any good team sport athlete. We have to talk on the field. We have to know what each of us are doing, where there are challenges, but of course where there are opportunities. And so we're locked in. I'm so heartened to see the group of people on here, many of whom we've been in touch and with our respective offices sort of nonstop in the past 57 days and certainly before then, but at a much deeper level. And so let us continue to remain hopeful that as we work collaboratively together, we'll get through this period. I have great faith that this will pass and we'll be stronger on the other end, and we will be outcomes driven, solutions oriented in service of the people of Rhode Island, as we've always been. And so I'm just so honored to work for and with so many of the people on this call, and don't hesitate to reach out.
Yep, and I'll just close by echoing all of that. I mean, I'm grateful that we come from a state where we have such a tremendous group of housing champions, people doing the work, advocates, and doers. That is all of you. It puts us as a state, I think, in a stronger place than a lot of other parts of the country to meet these challenging times. But we know that our job is to make sure that we have your back, that you have the resources, the legal protection, and the support that you need to do your jobs, so that we can accomplish that goal of Rhode Island being an affordable place to live and work for everyone. And these are challenging times, but I believe that all of us on this call, every single one of you, was meant for this time. It is in these times of challenges that people rise to the occasion, and I'm remembering the line from the book of Esther that says, and uh, Queen Esther's people were facing annihilation, but she was told, perhaps you were born for times like these. And I think that all of you and all of us were born to be in these times and to rise to this challenge. So I thank you all very much for your work and look forward to continuing to work with all of you.
Thank you so much for your inspirational leadership in Congress. We appreciate our delegation and your time and incredible information today. Wanted to give one last thanks to Katie West and the Housing Network of Rhode Island and all of the panelists who joined us today and everyone who joined us on the call. We will continue to carry this work forward in Rhode Island. We heard you loud and clear. We'll let you know what's going on the ground. We will continue to talk to our folks in red states and be content creators, keep telling the stories and keep doing the work. So thank you so much. Thank you all. Have a great day.